Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. This morning, we are discussing our commission staff's proposed changes to Article 8 and minimum filing requirements as it relates to rate applications. I'd like to recognize our participants first. I'm Jocelyn Boyd. I'm employed by the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. Who's present representing Lockhart Power Company, please?
Good morning. I'm Peg Fox here on behalf of Lockhart Power Company, and I believe virtually appearing is David Turner. I'll let him introduce himself.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I'm here. This is David Turner from Lockhart Power.
Welcome, Ms. Fox and Mr. Turner again. Who's present representing Piedmont Natural Gas Company, Incorporated?
Good morning, Ms. Boyd. My name is Jason Richardson. I'm here on behalf of Piedmont Natural Gas, and I believe joining me virtually is Ms. Pia Powers, and I'll let her introduce herself.
She's not on yet. Okay, if you see her, if she comes online, let us know, okay? Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Richardson. Who's representing the department or participating on behalf of the Department of Consumer Affairs?
Good morning, Jocelyn. This is Connor Parker, Assistant Consumer Advocate with the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs.
Good morning, Mr. Parker. And who's participating on behalf of Duke Energy Carolinas, LLC, and Duke Energy Progress, LLC?
Ms. Boyd, Frank Ellerby here for Duke. With me is Katie Brown, and she will be commenting on certain of the regulations. I've got a very small comment on one of the regulations.
Okay.
And Rachel Elliott will also be speaking to some of the proposals and giving y'all some feedback on the MFRs and the requests for schedules. And we also have Kamal Robinson here to make sure the rest of us get everything right for you.
Checks and balances.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good morning, Mr. Ellerby and Ms. Brown and Ms. Elliott and Mr. Robinson. Thank you for being here. Blue Granite Water Company.
Ms. Boyd, Frank Ellerby is appearing for Blue Granite, although Zach Payne, who is here and from the company, will be providing the feedback to the commission staff for Blue Granite. Thank you.
Mr. Ellerby. Mr. Payne, it's always good to see you. Dominion Energy South Carolina Incorporated.
Good morning, Jocelyn. I'm Chad Burgess. I'm in-house counsel for Dominion Energy South Carolina. I'm going to speak to the MFRs from the company's position today. With me today is Michael Anselmo from the law firm of McGuire Woods. He serves as our outside counsel.
Okay.
And he's going to provide a little bit of commentary on the Article 8 revisions.
Okay. Awesome. Good morning, Mr. Burgess and Mr. Anselmo. Who's participating on behalf of Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League?
Hi, this is Kathy Andrews with Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League.
Good morning, Ms. Andrews.
Good morning.
And the Office of Regulatory Staff?
Good morning, Jocelyn. My name is Chris Huber. I'm here as counsel for ORS, and I'm joined by Daniel Sullivan, who's the director of the ORS Audit Department.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Huber and Mr. Sullivan. And then, last but not least, who is representing South Carolina Water Utilities, participating on their behalf this morning? Scott, are you muted? Is your microphone on mute?
I am, thank you. Once again, this is Scott Elliott on behalf of the South Carolina Water Utilities. I appreciate the opportunity to be here on my client's behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Okay, so just a couple of regulations that I want, just two, I think, that I want to point out that I don't think were in the initial draft at all. Melissa, may we display the desktop? I'm going to find one reference, one regulation relates to service of our orders, and then another relates to electronic service between parties of record. And so there was a proposal that was filed in the docket in 2021, and I think when I reread it, it looks like some of the language in the drafts that we initially published, it appeared to me that some language was inconsistent with the new proposed language. So I think this is it. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. I didn't do the same, of course, with the MFRs, or the tables. Let me say that way in 103.823. But this is one sentence that was not struck. But I think it conflicts with the new proposal. So the written agreement memorializing the parties' consent shall be filed with the commission. I think if the second paragraph becomes effective, the first paragraph is no longer needed. So that was my reason. Of course, if you have other thoughts, please state those today. And then the other item is in blue. It relates to service of commission orders. And our staff spends time monitoring when attorneys, if they accept service, electronic service of our orders, and that takes time. And then if the attorney does not confirm service electronically, then the agency spends money to send those orders by certified mail. And of course, service of orders is not just allowed by our regulations, it's also permissive in the commission's statutes. So we have included this language and we're open to discussion about this morning. It's the time that we spend monitoring the confirmation of receipt of those orders, and then the money the agency spends to send those by certified mail when attorneys do not respond or confirm receipt of the order within 72 hours. So that's the reason for that language. I just wanted to point those two out to you. All right.
Jocelyn.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Ellaby.
Looking at 103.830.1, y'all are proposing to strike the second sentence of that first paragraph. I wonder if the first sentence should be also struck. Because if we now have a rule that says if you intervene, you are consenting to it, then there's no longer a need to have an agreement to that effect. And
right.
I'm just flagging for you that
okay.
you may want to be consistent, strike that first sentence also.
Also, thank you, Frank.
Jocelyn, that was on my list as well to discuss. It is superfluous now based on how we're shifting to the e-service and the consent via appearance or intervention. So I agree with that. I certainly think we need to strike that.
Thank you. Thank you both. Ms. Fox, we're going to start with you, and I'll call you Peg throughout this proceeding. It's a workshop. It's not a proceeding. It's a workshop. So if you don't mind me referencing the attorneys by your first name, that's what I will do.
I think that would be great.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here on behalf of Lockhart Power Company, which is a small electrical utility. We appreciate the opportunity to participate in this workshop and really appreciate the staff's hard work in pulling all of these comments together and putting this draft together. And we especially appreciate the recognition that small utilities are different from large utilities and don't have the same resources and don't have the same metrics, et cetera. So we really do appreciate that with respect to the minimum filing requirements in particular. The one concern we have with the minimum filing requirements is with the document that was circulated earlier this week that contains the schedules. As far as the ones that apply to Lockhart Power Company, there was A1 through A3, which are, appear to be fine. I don't know if it talks about in the MFRs, the schedules adopted by the commission. So the only comment we would have there is that if additional schedules are adopted or schedules are fleshed out or changed, that the parties would have some opportunity to review those before that occurs. The schedules, along those lines, A4 through A10 also apply to Lockhart, and there are not schedules for that. So again, in the future, if there are schedules adopted, we would like to have some opportunity to provide input on those. Something new this week was Schedule A9. There was a reference in the August 1st version that said that for A9 you should use C14 that applies to the larger utilities.
Yes, ma'am.
We have a concern with that because not from a standpoint of providing those metrics, but the more so that those metrics don't make sense for, in a lot of cases, for a small utility versus a large utility. For example, growth indices, things like that. We have very little growth in Lockhart, South Carolina, and that's not necessarily an indication of performance like it might be for a larger utility. It's just an indication that there's a difference. And so, things like that, or things like the number of employees per customer or number of customers per employee, metrics like those, it's not that Lockhart would have any concern with providing those. It's just how will they be interpreted and compared with larger utilities, and there really is no comparison. So that's just a general concern we have as well, and that goes along with providing input into these schedules and how they'll be used. Other than the minimum filing requirements, I did have one new change that I noticed that I wanted to point out, and it's in 103-833. And it looks like this change was not in the May version, but I think it was in the late July version, where this addition of attorney work product as far as being protected from discovery. I think that's good to add attorney work product as a category of documents that are, exempt from discovery, but in doing so, striking work papers, hearing preparation working papers, the attorney work product is replacing that, and it's two distinct things. So in the rules of civil procedure, there is a protection of documents that were prepared in anticipation of litigation, or in our case, for a hearing, and it's by or for a party, or by or for a party's representative, which includes not only attorneys but consultants, agents, etc. So what my suggestion there would be is, or is hearing preparation, leave in working papers and insert or attorney work product, to just recognize that those are two different things. And it's important because documents prepared in anticipation of a hearing, there's a due process concern if you don't protect those from discovery, with consultant papers and things that a party itself prepares in anticipation of a contested case hearing. You don't want to chill that process at all. So that's all I have to say about that one. And I agree with Mr. Ellerby that first sentence in 830.1 should be struck as well.
Okay.
So those are my comments for Lockhart.
Thank you. I think that the attorney work product, if my memory serves me correctly, I think that someone mentioned that in the last workshop, that phrase, a participant. We didn't, I'm quite sure. I don't think we thought about that internally. So thank you for noting that they are different. But I think that was a comment from the last workshop that we received.
Yeah, and I think it's appropriate to add it. I just don't think it should supplant the hearing preparation materials exception.
Okay. Thank you. Other than that, I think what you're saying too, Ms. Fox, is for the performance indices, your client would like to have input on whatever form the commissioners ultimately consider prior to them considering. Staff would, of course, have to submit that to them for their approval, all the MFRs for their approval.
Yes, and you may want to consider a separate A9 that, applies to the smaller utilities that's different from C14, because the performance indices for a large and a small utility will probably not be the same.
Okay, is that all you have right now, Ms. Fox?
That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so next on our agenda, Mr. Richardson on behalf of Piedmont Natural Gas Company.
Thank you again, Ms. Boyd. The company appreciates the commission staff's hard work on the revisions to Article 8 as well as to the MFRs. At this time, Piedmont does not have any further comments on this iteration of Article 8 or the MFRs, but appreciates the opportunity to participate in this workshop and as well as listen to comments from other parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Parker with Department of Consumer
Yes, ma'am.
Affairs.
Thank you, Jocelyn. We also do not have any new comments at this time, but would like to reserve the right to submit written reply comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress. And Frank, I'm going to call on you, and I know that you're going to refer us to Ms. Elliott and Ms. Brown when needed.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And Katie and I just conferred. I'm going to comment on a couple of the rules.
Okay.
For y'all to, a little bit of feedback, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Elliott to talk about the MFRs and also the schedule filing, and she can address that better than I. But a couple of things rather quickly. There's a change in 103-803, which addresses the commission's continuing authority to waive rules, and the existing rule says the waiver can be granted if it's not contrary to the public interest, and the proposed change is the waiver has to be shown to be in the public interest. That's not a very significant change, probably not intended to be a significant change, but our view is that the existing rule has been working nicely, working well. Commission we haven't had any trouble. We're not aware of anybody having any issues with it, and basically, to change it looks like you're trying to tighten it up or something. We don't think that's necessary, so we would suggest leaving it alone. But that's just, as we say, a suggestion. The other thing that I wanted to address is, I think this is consistent with what was intended, but under 103-835, which is discovery procedures.
Yes.
And the proposal is to allow, and y'all picked up on something we suggested, which was that when parties intervene, they can, upon request, they can get all the discovery that's been produced in the part. We would like to also add that, just to clarify that, with respect to confidential or proprietary information, that parties intervening and requesting to get that information can get it, but they either have to sign a non-disclosure agreement or get a protective order, something like, either of those processes. So some language in the rule protecting the confidentiality. We have worked on some language, and what I would propose to you is that we will file that in the docket so that everybody participating in the docket will be able to see it. And I'll do that promptly after the workshop so y'all could consider it, and everybody else would have an opportunity to see it.
Thank you.
And with we have a continuing concern about 103-845C.
Pre-file.
That's about pre-filing testimony. Excuse me, when testimony has to file at the time. Yeah. That those cases, we think that's still, it's still some ambiguity, and maybe the thing to do is to have in the rule defining those cases where testimony has to, rate cases or something like that. Well,
may I get her to display it for a second? Melissa, would you display? I want to ask you something, because when you said the rate cases, Frank, what I tried to do, just as it relates to the rate cases, because I think 103-823 basically says that the rate case testimony, the applicant's testimony, will be filed at the time of the application for that. So this section really wouldn't apply the 2 weeks after, except as provided in 103-823.
Okay.
So the rate case wouldn't be a part of the, it would be fuel cases. Holly, it's hard to, sometimes we know, for example, fuel cases, purchase gas adjustment cases, certain cases will go to hearing. And we know from the beginning, avoided cost cases, integration resource plan cases. So I guess we can list some.
Well, or, I mean, either that or at the time that the commission, that the notice is prepared and the hearing, a hearing is scheduled, maybe that would be the way to do it. That triggers some period of time that the problem is the parties need to know, if they're going to have to file their testimony at the same time they file the application, they're going to need some time to get the testimony prepared. And
Right.
I think you need clarity on what cases it applies to.
Okay, Melissa, would you display it again? I just want to ask you this, Frank. Okay, so I think this might have been added, and then tell me if this is not clear. So they shall file written testimony with or without exhibits within 2 weeks of, let's say, an application being filed, or within 2 weeks of the commission staff issuing a notice of filing, notice of hearing, and or notice of filing and hearing. You see that?
Ms. Boyd, I
Ma'am?
think the thing that we're trying to flag here is, so for example, in a fuel case, the notice of filing is issued, I think last year in the DEP fuel case, it was issued in December.
Yes.
We don't file testimony until
Okay.
April. And
I see
those,
your
and
example
those
there.
deadlines are set, by commission
Right.
order. And I know that we're working on those for the forthcoming fuel cases. So those testimony deadlines will be set. So it wouldn't make sense to require testimony to be filed within 2 weeks from, say, the DEP fuel notice getting issued in December 2021, and we don't file testimony for DEP until April 2022. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yes. It does, but I thought we heard, I think part of the reason for that is due to the way the information that you need to include in your testimony is not really ready for fuel cases. I'm not sure about PGA cases, but I think that's been the point as to why testimony couldn't be filed earlier for fuel cases. Because certain records weren't available. Is that right?
That's right, because generally the review period would not end until right before a testimony filing deadline.
Okay.
So those numbers are, I mean,
I see
if
what you
you're,
mean.
yeah.
Okay, so it probably would not apply, yeah, it can't because of, what the companies have said as to when the information is available. Is it the same for PGEAs, Mr. Richardson, as far as you know, and Mr. Burgess?
It is the same for
It's the same.
PGAs. What happens is the commission staff issues a notice of hearing
Yeah,
and just sets testimony deadlines, because that's a proceeding that's been created by the commission itself. It's
Right.
not created by statute or anything like that.
right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree with you on that. John, you agree? I agree with them on just the fuel and PGA cases.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so staff doesn't have a problem with those, only because of your internal records that you won't have, the information won't be ready for you to file. So we'll strike the fuel and PGAs, but I foresee this applying in integrated resource plans, avoided cost cases. It could be applicable there, unless the commission decides another schedule. So we'll strike the fuel and PGA part. No problem. Was that your major concern on that one?
Yes,
Okay.
one little, within 2 weeks of the commission staff issuing a notice of filing, notice of hearing, and/or notice of filing and hearing, we would suggest that you could limit that to notice of hearing or notice of filing and hearing. In other words, if you send a notice out, but there isn't a hearing that's included in that notice, then you shouldn't be triggering the filing of testimony, because there may not be a hearing.
Right. Well,
Ms. Boyd.
we have some transfer cases where people ask for expedited review and the commission still has to receive testimony in order to, I see what you're saying, Frank. You understand what I mean, though? Sometimes we do have situations where we do issue a notice of filing either because the company, we do, and then the company might ask for expedited review in the company's application. Joanne, commissioners are still considering, what's what we used to do for expedited review. In order for them to expedite, they had to have verified testimony to have, okay, so we're gonna have to think about that, the notice of filing, because sometimes we'll issue the notice of filing and we won't issue a notice of hearing because the company has asked for expedited review and we want to give the commissioners a chance. But if I were representing someone, I wouldn't want to slow that process down once the intervention date has lapsed. I would want to be able to ask the commission for expedited review, having filed my testimony, move this on along, So we'll think about that one, the notice of filing. That's a good point, but I know there's certain circumstances where the company, and we'll go ahead and issue the notice of filing to give the commission a chance to determine whether or not they want a hearing.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, you had something else?
Ms. Boyd, if I may, I
Yes, ma'am.
think even if you, if commission staff strikes that reference to the fuel cases and PGA cases, that you still run into the same problem because it's still a docket that requires a hearing, and the rule is still requiring us to file testimony within 2 weeks of the notice of filing and public hearing, which is what is issued in the fuel cases.
So when commissioners hear cases by expedited review, they are actually considering testimony, and that testimony basically is not part of a hearing record per se, but they use that testimony as evidence. So we count those requests for expedited review as hearings. They're just not, bodies present with cross-examination and a witness, but we do treat those as hearings. So just so if y'all wouldn't know that, but they are, because the commission is considering, not in the traditional sense, not, like I said, presenting a witness, but the commission is considering the witness's testimony to make a determination in the case. Just so you understand from our perspective that a hearing is still involved. The hearing is, and that's why we ask for verification of the testimony when it's expedited. And then Ms. Wheat includes those expedited reviews in her records as hearings, because commissioners are considering the testimony as evidence. Yes, sir.
Jocelyn, I don't want to interrupt, but I think we're having a good conversation about this. It seems, as what I'm hearing, is that the staff perhaps has some ideas of which specific types of cases that the commission may prefer testimony being filed within this timeline that's being proposed in the rule, but also hearing that there are, just given the inherent differences in the numerous types of matters that are before the commission, that it's probably going to be very difficult to draft a one-size-fits-all rule.
Right.
And it might be easier for the parties to give constructive and helpful comments if perhaps the rule was drafted with the specific types of matters in mind.
Okay.
Where the staff is going to perhaps recommend to the commission that this type of testimony timeline be instituted. Because I think, as Duke is capable of pointing out, there are a lot of things that are encompassed in these different cases that are just, it's, as you can see, just striking one sentence still leads to another problem about hearing. Perhaps that meant public hearing. It's hard to say. And we're happy to perhaps work with the commission. I think everybody would be, to see exactly which matters y'all are most interested in having this sort of construct apply.
Okay. That sounds good. I think that we can work on, I just mentioned some to you that we know statutorily that the commission's got to have a hearing, even if we strike fuel and PGA, just hearings under Act, 2 of them in particular under Act 62. I'm trying to think of another one where we file, I don't know, I can't think right now of another one where it's staff, just off the top of my head, where we initiate the notice of filing. Because the integrated resource plan, I can't remember if those are, if you all file those as applications or if you just file them as these are our comprehensive triennial IRPs. I'll have to go back and look. I'm not sure if you characterize those as applications or not in your filing. I'll have to look.
Jocelyn, maybe I can help here with respect to an IRP proceeding that comes around every 3 years.
Right.
the company does have to request that it be approved.
Mhm.
We may do that through a cover letter. Not sure exactly. We
Right.
haven't decided how we're going to do that just yet, but that would be a mechanism by which to do that. So we are applying for relief
Right.
from the commission with respect to that. The same is true in an avoided cost proceeding that
Right.
comes up every couple of years.
Yes.
Where the commission has ordered us to file an application with a lot of data in it. So that's
Right.
another instance in which we will be applying for something. And again, there would be a public hearing under the statute under the avoided cost proceedings. So those are, I think you've identified two matters where the 2-week rule, whether you like it or not, is another issue, but
Right,
would
right.
work.
Yeah, and the IRP one, Chad, is where I think our notice would probably trigger, because I don't think those are technically filed as an application. You know what I mean? I think
I
they're
don't
filed.
think an IRP is typically, at least the way the company has done it, is we file the application with a cover letter
Right.
that simply says, here's the IRP. We would respectfully request that it be approved.
Right.
So we are asking for relief through the cover letter, not in the sense of what I would call a technical application that
Yes.
you might see with a caption and all the
Right.
necessary citations and things of that nature, where it gets a little bit more involved. So
Yeah.
just a
Thank you.
different way to do it.
Thank you for that point. And Ms. Brown, I hear you too about, I think maybe also we could include language about expedited review, because oftentimes companies will ask for expedited review. Not oftentimes, that's not true, but companies will ask for expedited review, and when they do, in replace of a formal public hearing, the commission still wants the verified testimony. And we do treat those as hearings. So we can include language about requests for expedited review. In those instances, transfers are that's what comes to mind right now, as the one that I can recall. I'm sure there are others, but we'll work on a list. Okay, Mr. Ellaby.
I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Elliott now.
Okay, Ms. Elliott.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Again, I want to thank the commission staff for the opportunity to come speak again on behalf of Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas with regards to the proposed changes to the minimum filing requirements. Certainly appreciate the refinement and at least reducing the amount of requirements, so we certainly appreciate that. I have a few comments in regards to the requirements, and I'm going to start with the actual Article 8, Section 103.823, Part A, Subpart 3. There has been a new requirement added that says all schedules must be filed at the South Carolina jurisdictional level unless otherwise noted. I kind of want to start with, so some of the schedules or some of the MFRs will naturally be filed on a South Carolina jurisdictional basis just based on the information that's being requested. So for example, if you look at the executive summary, things like the, revenue requirement increase by customer class, the typical monthly bill impacts, the tariff sheets, that type of information would naturally be provided on a South Carolina retail basis. Also, too, when you start getting into the rate-based section and the net operating income section, things like your test year balances, your pro forma adjustment to your rate-based balances, your net operating income for the test year, and any adjustments to that, those things would naturally be provided on a total company basis as well as a South Carolina jurisdictional basis. But there are certain MFR requirements that are currently being proposed where that just wouldn't be practicable. And so, for example, if you look at Section D that covers the cost of capital, and there are a number of MFRs in that section, and so currently, from a Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress standpoint, we maintain our capital structure on a total company basis. We don't maintain a South Carolina specific cost of capital. So for example, we don't issue long-term debt on a South Carolina jurisdictional basis. It's done at a company level. And so, when we're establishing our revenue requirement in a rate case, we are calculating that revenue requirement using that total company cost of capital. And so that section is one that we just don't think would be practicable to be able to provide all those schedules on a South Carolina specific basis. Another example I would offer is up in the rate base section related to the 2-year balance sheet. So currently, the way our accounting system is designed, it's designed to account for our detailed transactions on a company basis. And then we use the cost of service study, that tool, to then take the information that's relevant for purposes of rate making to then allocate that down to the state jurisdictional level, but only to the extent that the information in the financial statements is relevant for rate making. So if you look at a balance sheet, for example, for Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas, there are hundreds of balance sheet accounts. And so what the cost of service study is doing is taking those relevant components of the balance sheet and the income statement to the extent it's needed for rate making and allocating those down on a state jurisdictional basis. Things like your plant in service balances, your depreciation reserve, your materials and supplies, your prepayments, things that you would typically see as a component of rate base in your rate applications. But there are other things on the balance sheet, for example, your cash balances, your receivables, your payables, those types of things aren't kind of involved in the rate making process, and so they aren't a part of the cost of service study. And so it would be a pretty huge undertaking for the company to try to take every single account on the balance sheet for 2 years down to a South Carolina jurisdictional basis. And so it really would require some redesign to the systems, because ideally you want your accounting system designed in a way where your detailed transactions can be produced in a way that would support back-end reporting on a state jurisdictional basis, and we just currently don't have that. And again, when you start talking about making accounting system redesign changes, you're looking at resources, you're looking at additional system costs that would then ultimately be passed on to customers. And so there is a requirement in Schedule Section E to provide the cost of service study, which we think would provide the information on a South Carolina basis to the extent it's relevant for rate making. But we'd ask that there be some consideration given to maybe revising that language to say if it's available, or just maybe considering removing that language, because some of the information is just going to naturally be provided just based on the requirement.
Okay, so let me ask something before I get John's input, Ms. Elliott. Is the information that your parent company reports, this is a rhetorical question, it's reported, for example, with the SEC on the parent level? There isn't DEC and DEP, it's just whatever, it's a comprehensive, I think.
Yes, but it does include debt like DEP and DEC, but it's not a state, like it's not DEP North Carolina and DEP South Carolina, it's DEP.
Okay.
And that's kind of how the financial statements are designed.
Okay.
But again, we use the cost of service study. That's kind of the tool that we use to then get those costs down to the state jurisdictional level.
So when you file, let's say with the SEC, you're filing DEP files and then Duke Energy Progress files, and then Duke Energy Carolinas files, Duke Energy Corporation doesn't file?
Yes, it does.
All three file, or just?
It is. It's all of Duke Energy Corporation's entity reporting segments.
Under Duke?
Under Duke.
And the information you provide, any other annual reports you provide to your shareholders, any other financial statements, they're done the same way, Duke, and then all of its subsidiaries are in that same document?
That's correct. And even if you look at like the FERC Form 1, that's an annual requirement, there's a FERC form for DEP and there's a FERC form for DEC. But again, it's not broken out in a state. It's just reporting on the total company as a whole.
Excuse me for a second. Ms. Elliott, would you be amenable to filing what's in your FERC form supplemental? FERC Form 1 supplemental? South Carolina supplemental?
Yes.
That information, I think, Mr. Powers said would be company specific, like for Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress. Like
Yes.
it would be specific for, I know they filed separately, but I think that would contain the balance sheet on the South Carolina jurisdictional level, the FERC Form 1 South Carolina supplemental.
I don't know. Maybe so.
Okay, Ms. Elliott, our initial thoughts are, we're gonna go back and look at the content of the FERC Form 1 South Carolina supplemental. And that information that we can find there, more than likely we'll indicate it in the schedules, and what we can't find, we'll have to leave in the schedules, if that makes sense. What
Okay.
the information that's currently in the schedules, if we see where it is currently located in the FERC Form 1 South Carolina supplemental, it looks like we'll be able to ask the companies to include that information in their rate case application, because it's South Carolina jurisdictional information. But if there is some information, because I think you didn't really have any comments about the net operating income section. Your comments, I think, were really under the rate base section, for example, the 2-year balance sheet.
Yeah, and even, if you look at the net operating income section, so for example, administrative expenses, industry dues, like that doesn't naturally get produced out of our accounting system on a state jurisdictional basis, but those are line items that, we could go through a manual process to produce. But it was just when you start getting into every single account that's on the balance sheet, that gets to be a little bit more of a challenge. But if there is a supplemental FERC Form 1 filing that takes the balance sheet for every account and allocates it to a South Carolina jurisdictional basis, if that information is already currently available, I'm not familiar with that particular form, but if that's available, the company would certainly not be opposed to including that as part of the rate application.
Okay. All right. So we'll look at that and see what we can find, and what's not included in that. We will communicate that.
Okay.
In the schedule. Okay, and then you mentioned the cost of capital too. Oh, I didn't get to ask, do you want to comment about that? Ms. Elliott said that they maintain that information on the parent level, not, on DEC or DEP level.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify one thing. It is maintained on the DEP, like the DEP and DEC level.
Oh, okay.
My comment was it's not maintained, like we don't have long-term debt for South Carolina and long-term debt for North Carolina. It's just DEP and DEC long-term debt.
Yeah. So,
Oh,
excuse me.
no, you're good. I understand what she's saying.
Yeah. So you have your cost of capital for DEP and DEC, and that's what you would provide in your rate case.
That's right.
Yeah. What you're saying is you don't have it on the South Carolina level.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if that's what the company's requesting in their rate case, I think that would be sufficient.
On the company level versus
on the
state
company level, yeah. And you're saying it would be impossible to provide it on a South Carolina level.
I don't know that it's available just because, again, I use long-term
Right.
debt as an example. We don't issue long-term debt just for South Carolina.
Right.
And if you look at our rate applications, when we're calculating the revenue requirement, it's based on the cost of capital
Yes.
for DEP and DEC as a total company.
Yeah.
It's not South Carolina
Yeah,
specific.
and that makes sense. Yeah, so, and in Florida, Duke and Progress don't provide that on a Florida basis. Is that right? Do you know?
I'm not familiar with Florida's
Okay.
cost of capital inputs.
Okay, yeah, I think we can look into that, but
Okay.
my initial thoughts are, if that's what they're requesting in the rate case, the DEP and DEC, then
It might be okay.
yeah.
So I think the other thing, John, is whether, if we need any additional, like, do we need to modify the directions at all? That's what we'll talk about.
The explanation?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and the-
if that's the case, we would need to edit.
And
Good
we'd be happy
explanation.
to propose some alternative language for the commission staff to consider if that's something that you're open to.
Yes, we will receive the comments if you have some.
Okay.
Okay, was that all? Ms.
I
Elliott?
have a few more comments. And actually, while we're talking about the cost of capital, I'll just put in my other comments related to that as well. So going down the requirements under the cost of capital, a couple things kind of jumped out at us. So there are several requirements where the information is being requested on a 12-month average. And so, historically, we haven't used an average cost of capital to set our rates. And so we were just, I guess, curious as to the 12-month average requirement. I do know when this was originally drafted, it was using a 13-month average, which was something that was a requirement in Florida. So we know just from talking to our counterparts at Duke Energy Florida, they actually use a 13-month average in their cost of capital to do their rate calculation. So we didn't know if that was we weren't sure the line of thinking of using the 12-month average, since that's typically not how we do our revenue requirement calculation to
Can you
set
give me the
rates.
schedule you're talking about?
If you go down to schedule D4, D5, so it's asking for like short-term debt D3.
So these are in the MFRs?
Yes, under the section D, cost of capital. You're asking for the short-term debt, the long-term debt outstanding, preferred stock. That's all on like a 12-month average for the test year and the prior year. And so we were just given historically how we've used the cost of capital in our rate-making process here in South Carolina, we were just wondering about the 12-month average. Because you're typically looking at end of test year balances with maybe some,
Okay, Ms. Elliott, we're going to delete the 12-month average references.
and there are some references to that in some of the individual schedules, because there was a little bit of a disconnect in some of the schedules because they were still referencing the 13-month average. For example, MFR D3 and D4. So to the extent you strike it here in the table, it's in the Article 8, the schedules would need to be adjusted as well.
Are they in the, I was looking for them in, I think there is the 12-month average now is only listed in the, unless you can tell me otherwise, in the MFRs. I don't.
Yes,
see
in the
them.
actual
Okay.
PDF MFR document, not the Article 8 table.
Okay, you may proceed.
And then one other thing as it relates to the cost of capital. So there is D2 in particular where It looks like the requirement is kind of going beyond the South Carolina Utilities cost of capital, and it's requesting it for, non-regulated operations, other regulated utility operations. And so we were just a little bit interested in, should this be maybe limited to the extent it's applicable for South Carolina?
Okay, Ms. Elliott, thank you for your patience. So what we're going to do, we're going to think about the all non-regulated operations combined. We're still thinking about whether or not we want to exclude that. But we will, for the parent company, include language that says the parent company, if the parent company is responsible for raising funds for the jurisdictional utility. And it's possible, it's also possible, highly possible, it will be, the sentence will read, or the phrase will read, for the subject South Carolina utility, comma, all regulated utility operations combined instead of all other. And then we're going to still talk internally about the non-regulated portion. But for the parent company, if we will include language that they are responsible for raising funds for the jurisdictional utility.
And so for all other regulated utility operations, you're meaning in addition to DEC and DEP, the other
Well, I think right now it's just gonna say all regulated utility operations instead of all other,
Okay.
okay? But
Okay.
we need to talk more among ourselves about the non-regulated operations.
Okay.
But for the parent, limiting that to how the parent is assisting in raising funds for the jurisdictional utility. We will include that language.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Elliott, you may proceed.
Okay, I just have a few more comments. So I'm going to skip up to section C now, that's dealing with the net operating income.
Okay.
So there are a number of requirements for particular expense items. So like starting at C3, a 5-year analysis of changing costs, you got uncollectible accounts, administrative expenses, industry dues. So there are certain requirements where it's limited to the test year versus there are other requirements that we're expanding beyond the test year. So, for example, let's see here. The outside professional services C-7, the administrative expenses C-5 are limited to the test year, but the industry dues and the lobbying expenses are beyond the test year. And so we didn't know if that was by design, and we just wanted to comment that since in South Carolina, we're required to use a historical test year that can be adjusted for known and measurable changes, we were just wondering if maybe that should be limited to the test year for all those expense categories.
Okay, so for example, okay, C9 is for the test year. Let's see. So C9 is the test year. C10, well, that's not. Let me go back. C8's test year. C7 is test year. Okay, C6. That looks like the test year too, right?
Well, it says test year in the most recent historical year.
Okay, okay. Most recent, okay, I see that in C6.
And then C9, it says the test year in the most recent prior year versus the other expense categories are limited to the test year. And again,
I think staff's reason for that was just like for comparison purposes, but we'll look at those. But I think that was the reason, just to compare.
Just a couple more, I think, and then I'll be wrapping up here. So there is a requirement in that section C13, transactions with affiliated companies. And so one of the comments we had here was, so the company currently files with the commission an annual affiliate transactions report. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't know if the intent is to have this as an additional requirement in addition to that annual report, or if there's an opportunity to leverage the information that's already produced in that annual report.
Well, I remember us talking about that, and I think there's another. I think we're gonna have to talk about it. I'm trying to think, Joanne, how we can, I don't know that we can really take judicial notice of annual reports filed with the commission. And I'm gonna tell you what, we might have to think on another schedule I see was for water or wastewater. We indicate if those affiliated transactions aren't included in the annual report, but I think we're gonna have to amend that. Because I just don't think that's something they can take. I think everybody's gonna have to file. Ms. Ellie, I wasn't talking around you, I was trying to think through what you're asking, but I don't think the commission I don't know how that information is gonna become a part of the record. I don't think they can take judicial notice of it like they could, like another docket. I think it would have to be in the filing for it to become part of the.
Yeah, and I guess that maybe the question is in lieu of this requirement, could we file the most recent
Oh,
affiliate transactions report? Or
it's
is
in their annual report.
And I could see where you could get into timing issues where the affiliate transactions, would be stale, where you wouldn't have that information for that test year, depending on when you filed. And obviously the commission would want information on affiliate transactions for the test year, right?
So I guess you can, I think what he's saying is, Elliot, is that your company can do that if it tracks the test year.
that's fair.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, then we would ask that you file, under the schedule, or file the information in the schedule.
And then along that same lines, there's a requirement in the miscellaneous section F related to business contract with officers and directors. So the way it's currently written, the requirement, it says, provide a copy of the business contract with officers, directors, and affiliate schedule included in the company's most recently filed annual report. And so I guess the question there is there a particular annual report that's being referenced here? Because we're not aware of that particular schedule being included in a annual report filing that we currently make. We do know that this is a requirement in the Florida MFRs, and there is a requirement in Florida that they produce an annual report to the commission there. And within that filing, there is a report that contains this specific schedule. And so we didn't know if this is the intent for us to start preparing this schedule, or was there some understanding that we were already producing this as part of some annual report?
Yeah. Is this provided as any kind of SEC or FERC filing?
Not that I'm aware of. Not the way it's written in these quotes. But I do know this specific schedule is included in a Florida annual reporting requirement.
Okay, I think the intent of the wording of the annual report was the FERC Form 1 or 2. I'll take a look at that.
Okay.
But
Okay, Ms. Board, I'm almost finished.
Okay.
I think I've got one more. So back to section B, which is the rate-based section. So there is a requirement for, it's B-5 and B-6, to provide plant balances by account and depreciation reserve balances by account. And so the first part of that, no concerns there. It's the part that was added about providing information regarding our construction, or contribution in aid of construction. And it says if applicable. And so we didn't know if that meant if it's available. I only bring this one up because the way our asset management system currently works is if we're, doing a construction project, it's in process, we get a payment for a CIAC, that payment gets applied against the construction cost balance. And so when that balance then moves to our plant and service and starts being depreciated, it's just a net balance. We don't have a line item in like our reserve system that says this part of the reserve is CIAC. And so that information isn't readily identifiable once the construction project is finished and it starts to depreciate. And so I didn't know if there was something in particular that the commission staff was after with adding this particular requirement to provide CIAC information.
So you're saying you currently don't report CIAC in any of your filings, previous rate case filings now, or any reports with the commission?
Well, like for example, in our rate base, the plant balance that's included in rate base, if there was any CIAC applied to it, it's a net balance. So, but we don't have it broken out between what the gross amount was versus what the CIAC was. It's just a net balance.
You want to come back to that?
I mean, if you don't have an account for CIAC, I mean, I don't imagine that information would be too difficult to break out. Correct?
Well, based on feedback from our asset accounting team, it's maybe not on the plant side, but when you start getting into the reserve side, that's going to be pretty difficult to do because you've got different assets being depreciated at different lives, different
Right.
depreciation rates. That's going to be a
Right, and that information isn't provided in rate cases in any kind of discovery request, or
I can't speak to that today. I would have to go back and look at prior discovery. It may have been in terms of if we've collected CIAC, because we certainly do during the construction process. I'm just explaining that once it moves into our plant and service account and the depreciation process starts, what's passed is that net balance.
Right,
It's not
right.
broken out.
yeah, and what I think ultimately what we're worried about is the net balance. But yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think that actually concludes my comments. I did want to point out one thing just from observation. When I was looking through the Article 8, like titles and explanations that's actually in the table versus the PDF document, there's a little bit of differences between some of the title language where the titles were a little bit different. And so I'm certainly happy to share that. I didn't know if that was by design or if that was something that the commission staff would be interested in taking a look at, but that was just an observation as I was going through both sets of schedules.
I think you may, but what I will file for approval will be in the tables.
Okay.
And yeah, what I'll file for approval for the regulation will be in the tables.
Because I think some of the titles were updated or changed from like the initial version that we talked about a month or so
Right.
ago, and so I think there was just some differences between the two.
Yeah, so what will basically be reviewed by the General Assembly is what's in actually Article 8, 103.823
Okay.
is what will be, we'll go through a formal hearing process and then it'll go before the General Assembly. So this is what basically will govern. Those titles will basically govern
Okay.
the tables.
All righty. Well, that concludes my comments, and I thank you again for your time today.
Thank you.
And I'll turn it over to Katie.
I actually don't think I have anything else. Did you
Okay.
have something, Frank? Thank you.
Y'all,
I think we're done
You're done?
for
Okay.
now.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Elliott, Mr. Ellerby, and Ms. Brown. Frank again, Blue Granite.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Payne to give you feedback from Blue Granite.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Zach, how are you?
Doing well. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
I was having trouble with that. Just wanted to start off by saying thank you for allowing us to be here today and provide
Sure.
input. We appreciate it, and also appreciate some of the changes that were made compared to the last draft that was put out, specifically A 9.5 and A 12.5 concerning the cost of service study and forecast capital investment. We think those are good additions. We appreciate that. For today, as far as the new points that were added, A17, A18, and A19 for the water and wastewater. Main concerns we have are related to A17.
Okay.
Kind of got a recommendation and then concerns to share, I think.
The performance indices?
Yes, ma'am.
Zach? Okay.
So I think first off, we look back compared to our annual report. Out of the, I believe, 8 different topics that are listed there, the O&M expense and number of customers, that information is provided through the annual report. And then the mile of pipe is in 2 different ones, I believe. And we do provide feet of mains in our annual report. I wasn't sure, again, kind of to the concerns of, just how what exactly do you mean by miles of pipe? Do you mean all the way to the service line level, or is that just at the mains level? Do
All
you know?
right. We can clarify that, Zach.
Okay. So again, with those, the O&M number of customers and at least feet of mains already included in the annual report, we kind of recommend that if we were to include the number of employees in the annual report, I believe the technical summary would probably be the best place to include that. We would really provide all that information to our annual report versus making it a minimum filing requirement. And we think it would be better to have it that way, in that you would have a consistent time period that you would be making those, observations based on, instead of if you do it based off test year, from one rate case to another, you're going to have different points of time that you're looking at, and it's going to make it a little more difficult to compare, say, from, whatever our next rate case compared to our last rate case, compared to if you just use the annual report information where we're already providing, kind of cut back on a duplication of effort and go with that.
Okay, so Zach, what you're saying, let's say you file your rate case in September of this year, so the last annual report the commission probably will have on file will be for the year ended 21.
Yes, ma'am.
So you're recommending is using the information. I think that was some of the reason for just trying to get information that, well, the test year is going to be dated a little bit.
Yeah, you could get a fiscal year or some other test year other than the calendar year. The annual reports would be typically filed on a calendar year.
I think they're filed on a calendar year, aren't they?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I think staff's concern is some of this information isn't currently on the annual report, and this would be a level of detail beyond what's currently provided.
And again, I think the main thing that's not already included in there is number of employees. There's also one for number of contractors, which I have a question about. But really, if we include the number of employees, the O&M expenses in there, number of customers is in there. And again, we currently include the feet of mains that we have in the system. To the extent that per mile of pipe is looking for more granular level detail. Again, I think I guess the overarching point is that we could tweak the annual report to get all this information. We're already providing a decent amount of it through the annual report, and that, rather than creating a new requirement, I think could be a little easier just to have it done through the annual report. And again, then you have that consistency of time period where you're looking at. Also add in that through discovery and various processes going through the audits, we're also going to provide that information. I know there's a difference between what we provide to ORS and what we provide to, file necessarily in the public staff. But, when number of employees, we're going to do a salary build. We're going to include every employee whose salaries we're looking to recover. Number of customers is going to be in there. And then the feed of pipe. So as far as any timing differences between the information that's included in the annual report and what would get you caught up to the test year, again, that
It'll be an audit and probably part of ORS's testimony, I guess, or their consideration, I think is what you're saying.
Well, whatever difference between the annual report, calendar year and through the test year, that information will be provided through discovery and through the review process through a rate case.
Okay.
So I think, like I said, that just kind of a recommendation to it.
I see what you mean. So Zach, that was a similar question I was asking Ms. Wessinger Hill about, the commissioners wouldn't be able to reference that or like include it as part of the record unless it's in your application. So John, I guess we need to look at, if the information is in the annual report, can we ask them to include that with their filing? There's something to talk about, because the commission can't, I think we've agreed, they can't take judicial notice of the annual report. So it will have to be a part of the application.
Okay.
Okay? And then maybe we can see what else is maybe not in there, maybe just something to consider.
Right. Right. I guess we could add language that says that if this information is provided in the annual report, it needs to go in this schedule, correct?
That and/or I just need you to consider whether or not they can include that as an exhibit or attachment to the application. I think what he's saying is,
Right.
he's talking about duplicating work's already been done. There's something to talk about. You don't have to make a
Okay.
amount today, but I think that's something I think that's what he's saying. And what we were saying is we can't go and we can't build the application. I mean, you understand what I mean? You're going to have to include it in the application for the commissioners to consider it.
It has to be part of the record.
Yes,
whereas
sir.
the annual report isn't.
Right. So
Okay.
if John, I think John, Cody, and his team are going to think about whether or not to ask you just to attach your annual report to your application. I think that's something you'll consider.
Yeah, but again, there's things like, I think, employee numbers and
Yeah. I
and
think
contractors that aren't included, but so.
we'd have to modify.
We'd have to modify the
Yes,
annual
sir.
report to get that done.
We would have to do that until you can. I mean, you can ask the commissioners to
Mhm.
modify the annual report to include that information. If that's the way you want to do it. Looks like we just
And
have
that would be uniform for all
for
water waste
everybody,
programs.
yes, sir.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then so whatever they file, they can just include the annual report with the filing.
Right.
Are we on the same page with what you were talking about? Zach?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Jocelyn, this is Chris Uberis. Can I
Hey,
jump in
Chris.
real quick on, just on A7?
Okay.
Just- We had a comment on that too. The only thing I'll comment on as far as the information being provided through Discovery as opposed to MFR is if it's gone ahead and provided on the front end through the MFR, it's gonna, we go ahead and we have the information at the outset, because we do ask for it in Discovery, but
Okay.
we have the information at the outset to start looking at it as opposed
Okay.
to asking for it in Discovery and getting it.
Well, Chris, so John mentioned asking the commissioners to consider modifying the content of the annual report to include more of the information here as applicable. If it's not there, if we aren't currently asking for it, ask the commissioners to consider amending the current annual report form to include these additional metrics. Does that make sense, or is that not?
It does, and I can take it back and discuss it. The only issue there might be, was for the timing.
The timing for y'all?
All right, the annual report wouldn't be necessarily as of what would be in the schedule.
Okay. All right. We'll just, let's talk and see thank you, Chris. All right, so let me write this down, Zach.
Okay.
Chris, is it appropriate, let's say, Jocelyn, you can't answer this question, I won't ask it. Consider it not asked. Does your data requests, do y'all call them data requests? That you send to companies for interrogatories? Is that what you call them? Or
We
you call them
typically
something else?
request for information.
Request for information.
I mean,
All right, the timing of it, do you ask for within the last month, 2 months?
as far as this.
The indices,
specific-
yes, sir.
I'm not sure how to go back and.
Okay,
check,
I was just, as we talk, if you can file something like that, as John and I talk, I think it would be helpful.
Okay.
You understand what I mean? If we're gonna, I want to let's look at the whole picture. Like, I understand your point about the timing, but what time do y'all need?
I can check into that.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, Zach, would you please continue?
Yes, ma'am. So say all that, and then kind of everything from here on out is just kind of as it stands. Should
Okay.
that recommendation not be taken.
Okay,
I think really we're looking for a little clarity on what some of the metrics are looking for.
okay,
Again, the miles of pipe being one, customer satisfaction and customer complaints. I know for one of the things that we do reporting wise internally is commission level complaints versus our call centers. Are we going to record every call center call complaint that we're getting, or where's just kind of
like categories might be more helpful, like we had categories of types of complaints that the commission's interested in.
yes,
Maybe.
just
Okay.
something a little more specific to give us clarity on what level of complaints that we're looking for.
Okay,
And then this So assuming that's the primary look for customer satisfaction is going to be that number of complaints, I think, from what I'm
Okay.
looking at it.
Okay.
So another one is number of employees and contractors. I think kind of two things here would be, how do we consider part-time employees? Or, are we going to do like an FTEs 0.5?
Okay.
Are we just using whole numbers? And then as far as vacancies, are we doing full employment? And one last would be, allocated personnel, like myself personally, I work at the Atlantic Cost Center, so, I don't even show up on Blue Granite necessarily if you
Okay.
take just a Blue Granite. So, how do we factor in allocated employees, overhead type employees? And then just to Ms. Fox's point, another question we have is just how exactly are these being used in the rate setting process? Some of them, again, kind of broad and maybe irrelevant to the to have an identifiable impact on the overall rate proceeding. Just kind of wondering.
Like, are they going to be used to determine? I mean, Blue Granite, I think they have ROE.
Yeah,
Is it
they're
going to
gonna-
be used to determine whether or not what you request is substantiated by your performance, your company's performance?
Yeah, are we looking to establish performance rate making?
Okay.
And then
Okay.
two, is it strictly going to be Blue Granite now compared to Blue Granite in the past, or is it going to be Blue Granite versus, the other water companies, sewer companies? There is some concern there, especially, we're very geographically spread out. I mean, we have operations from Greenville to Aiken to York down to Georgetown. We're everywhere.
I think that's a fair question.
And so especially, and then really even to the extent we're only being compared to ourselves, there can be some operational changes over the years, especially going back over 5 years, where Friars Gate sewer would be an instance where, once we had to do an interconnection, so our O&M expenses, that's a big change to our O&M to have purchased sewer treatment versus doing it ourselves. So even looking at our own performance over 5 years, how are those kind of things going to be taken into context? Again, to the extent of how that information is going to be used.
That's a good question. How is it going to be used? I think that's fair. Okay.
So I think that concludes.
That's it right now?
Yes.
Okay. Fair question. All right. Frank, do you have anything else right now for Blue Granite?
Nothing further.
right now.
Thank you.
All right. Chad, you ready for Dominion? You and Mr. Anselmo?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Michael's going to hit the Article 8
Okay.
matters real quick, and then I'll address the
MFRs.
minimum filing requirements.
Yep. Thanks, Jocelyn. We've briefly touched on some, so I won't reiterate things I've already said. But in 830.1, again, we do join the consensus that the first sentence needs to be struck if the second sentence is going to be struck. And then in the new language that's being proposed, the last line says, if a party does not have the ability for electronic service, the party shall be served by traditional means. Non-electronic service is already covered in 817.1E5. And rather than a non-defined term of traditional means, perhaps a reference to serve pursuant to 817.1E5 is preferred, so parties have clarity on adhering to that rule.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Let me scroll down on my next one here. And we do join in with what Peg said early in 833 about working papers and attorney work product. Those are two separate things that really should both be into the regulation. It's a good addition, but the strike perhaps was inadvertent. And then we've talked already briefly about 845 as far as the company's position that again, it would be more beneficial, I think, if we knew which specific instances staff was recommending this sort of new timeline for testimony be filed. That way we can have targeted input to the commission rather than trying to one-size-fits-all something that does not appear to probably not obtainable based on the differing types of cases that come in front of the commission.
Okay.
And then we just go back and reiterate what we said in written comment previously about the additional cost associated with pulling together an application and testimony within the same timeline. It's going to add to the workload there.
Okay.
And
Mike, may I think our producers need a short break, please. Thank you. Good morning and welcome back. Mr. Anselmo, thank you for allowing me to interrupt you and thank you for allowing us to take our break. Would you proceed? I think you were talking about 103845 and specific instances where testimony would be filed.
Jocelyn, that's right. I was just reiterating what I said earlier, that it probably, I think from the company's position and my position is, if we knew the types of matters where the commission staff was going to recommend this sort of construct, that way we could provide the more targeted comments to the commission. That's it. The break came at a good time to stop me from rambling, so I will turn it over to Mr. Burgess.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning again, Jocelyn. I'm Chad Burgess for Dominion Energy South Carolina, and like the other participants in the workshop have said today, I really do appreciate the commission staff opening up its doors to hear us on points in these particular matters. I'm going to be speaking with respect to the minimum filing requirements today, and as you know, we've filed letters commenting on the process or the requirements. We were here at the last proceeding about a month and a half ago, and we've articulated our concerns there. I'm not going to rehash all of those, but there is one particular concern that I do want to continue to bring up, and I'll go ahead and apologize in advance. It may not be a popular position to take, but I do think it's one that should be given some thought and some consideration to. As everybody knows, Act 175 set forth the roles and responsibilities of the various participants in the regulatory process. Without question, the commission is the adjudicator. Without question, ORS serves as the prosecutor, if you will. And the company, its obligation is to provide safe, reliable service, and we attempt to do so in an affordable manner. Those are the lanes that we have to operate in, whether we agree with them or not. Those are the lanes that the General Assembly has told us to position ourselves in. In addition to that, the Supreme Court has been pretty clear that the commission doesn't have the ability to investigate, review, or audit the company's various matters. That is a role that is exclusively designed and set for ORS, and they do their job very well. The concern that the company has with the minimum filing requirements is we believe that these MFRs represent a departure from Act 175. And I certainly recognize, we had a little bit of a discussion about this last time, I don't think that's the intent of the commission staff to depart from Act 175. But I sometimes don't intend to do a lot of things, and people tell me I do them anyway. So I need to be clear on that. So because this is a departure, it is concerning for the company that the commission and its staff may be departing from its adjudicatory lane and moving into a prosecutorial lane, which has been reserved for ORS. Again, these MFRs, it really appears to us to be an attempt to codify discovery. A lot of these matters that are set forth in here, the company receives data requests in its various filings from ORS and other parties with respect to these subject matters. And we follow that process because that's the process that the General Assembly has established.
Chad, may I ask you this? So when you reference MFRs, are you, just for our clarification, you're referring to this document that has this cover page. Are you also talking about the table that's in 103.823?
Yes, ma'am. I was reading both those documents together.
Okay.
So, because I think some of these in the right-hand column, the explanation column, it says, refer to Schedule C14, and that's the document that you're holding in your right hand is where I was going to see C14. If I'm wrong on that point, please correct me. But yes, I'm referring to both sets of documents.
Okay.
Like I said, the concern is that the commission is departing from Act 175. And I certainly heard very clearly, I think the company asked the question at the last meeting, what problem is trying to be solved for with these MFRs? And the response, based on my recollection, was that the commission staff wanted a little bit more information and may even have been getting a little frustrated with the fact of lack of information. And I don't know what goes on behind the walls here at the commission as far as interaction between the staff and the commission. But the concern is that information is being sought by the adjudicator in a manner that is not provided for under current law. We certainly think that if the commission wants this information, there's a process in place today that allows for the gathering of that information. It's pretty clear, at least in my opinion, in reading the statute and case law, that while the commission has the right to review and inspect and audit utilities, they just don't have the ability to go directly to the utility and ask for that information. They actually have to make a request of ORS for that information if that's what they're ultimately seeking. So I do think that by attempting to promulgate a regulation, it appears to me, while again may not be the intent, that a short circuit is being created in the process whereby the commission is indirectly going around ORS, if you will, under the statute, and going straight to the utility by requiring the utility to make these MFRs at the outset of its application. And I don't think that's the intent of Act 175. I don't think that's what the General Assembly was looking to do when it restructured the regulatory process in South Carolina. I think the General Assembly was pretty clear, and I think the case law is clear on this, that the matters that are set forth in these MFRs, those are matters that are between ORS and the company as far as what ORS is seeking to do from their due diligence standpoint, and other parties too. There are other parties who take interest in certain of these matters whenever we have a rate case. But I don't think that the commission staff is able to do what it's attempting to do through this regulation. I think the statute already sets up a process by which to do that. If I'm wrong on this point, and I could be, I think there's an argument to be made that the commission could ultimately regulate ORS out of existence if it chose to do so by requiring more information from the utilities. I don't think that's anybody's intent here. I've heard Mr. Powers indicate a couple times he's just looking for more information, which I completely appreciate. But I do think we have to do it within the bounds of Act 175, and I think this leaks outside of those bounds, in my legal opinion. Again, I may be wrong, others may think differently, but that's how I'm interpreting the statute that sets up the process. That's how I'm interpreting the case law that's been handed down by the South Carolina Supreme Court with respect to the roles and responsibilities of the commission vis-a-vis ORS. So I have not gone through each one of these schedules with respect to what's good and what's bad. I think Duke and other companies have hit on some important matters. But I do think, at least for Dominion Energy South Carolina, from a baseline perspective, from a level set perspective, we're concerned that this attempt at this regulation is contrary to Act 175 itself, and I'm having a hard time reconciling how we have the adjudicator, the prosecutor, and now we have the adjudicator demanding information, certain information be provided at the outset that may in fact not be an issue in a proceeding. I think the appropriate way, and maybe the way this has been handled in the past, again, I don't know what goes on behind these walls, but it would seem to me that the utility presents its case in the manner that it seems fit. It has an obligation to meet the burden of proof that's placed upon it. If the utility fails in that burden, which sometimes it does, that's how things work out. I think that if there's information in the commission's file, I would anticipate that commission staff would engage in their technical role as far as advising the commissioners on whatever they advise them on. And if there are gaps in information or pieces that they may not understand or follow, then I think the appropriate mechanism would be for the commissioners in a public hearing to ask questions where staff may have assisted them in the preparation of questions that, hey, I've read this schedule, I don't understand this point, can you help me with this? I think that's how the process, at least in my experience in appearing before this commission, has been. So I'll just leave it with a parting comment here that DEC is just concerned that Act 175 will not support this type of regulation change. So we would just ask that you take that into consideration as you go through your calculus and deciding what you want to present to the commission. And also, too, I believe in managing expectations. We would intend to continue to advance that argument as long as it needs to be advanced with respect to this. So that's all I have, Jocelyn. I appreciate your time and thank you for considering our comments.
Well, we appreciate your comments and your company's continued participation. I think, Chad, we are still at the point, for example, there are some specific requirements for companies other than water and wastewater companies. There's a current requirement in 103.823, and it's been there at least the last 20 years because that regulation hasn't been changed since I've been here, not that part. And so we did indicate that there has been frustration internally when technical staff has been receives requests to perform certain analysis and they are unable to perform those analyses because the information is just not available, and we can't pick up the phone and call the company or any other party because, as you said, the commission is the adjudicator. But even beyond that, we're tasked with every 5 years, we're supposed to have been reviewing our regulations, and at this point, we just don't see the requirements in 103.823A3 as being sufficient for the utilities. We just don't see it. And as I said, I know that section has not been amended. So that's really where we are. We did shed more light into our operations, some instances of frustration. I didn't mention all, but those were some that I could recall. But at the same point in time, there are some existing requirements for what should be included in applications, and staff is of the opinion at this point that information needs to be updated. It needs to be updated, and then all of the rate application requirements for all utilities should be in one section, so the public included, is not looking everywhere, all over our regulations for what's required of water companies, what's required of wastewater, combined electric and gas. It should be in one section. So we respect the position of your company. We understand.
I appreciate that, Jocelyn. And if I may, with respect to the requirements that are in the regulations today, you're right, they have been in there for a long period of time. I think those were also there when the regulatory construct was different, where you didn't have ORS at the table. They weren't in existence when those regulations were promulgated. That was a day and age where the company would interact with commissioners, they would interact with commission staff, and to the extent that a commissioner had a question or a staff member had a question, it was a matter of picking up the phone. You could certainly do that, or coming over here and have a meeting. Those days, right or wrong, they're over. They've been over for a while. But I think if, at least in my interpretation of the statute, I think the legislature left a little bit of that open from the standpoint that if there was something that was maybe not understood or concerning to the commission or the staff, the commission would have to ask ORS to take a look at that, and then ORS, and I know they've done that on a couple of occasions, but then ORS would be responsible for running down that information and reporting back to the commission.
So let me ask you something. Is your company of the opinion that there shouldn't be any filing requirements for rate case applications at all? For example, what was remaining? Because there was a review of our regulations did take place after Act 175, and this language remained. But you could be telling me at this point you feel that Act 175 that there shouldn't be any filing requirements, that a utility should be able to file whatever the utility wants to file in their rate case application.
So what I'm saying is I do recall reviewing these regulations after 175, after Act 175, and a lot of that really was changing out the word commission for ORS. That was really a large part of the review of those regulations, because there were things that the commission could no longer do because of Act 175. So I think there was a cleanup from that standpoint. I don't recall ORS or the commission staff or even the companies getting into the details with respect to what should the company file. I think the company should file what it thinks it should file in order to carry out the burden of proof that that has been placed upon it. There are certain things that the company has to do with respect to the way the regulation is written today that predated Act 175. It, again, right or wrong, it carried over into the new regulatory regime that we operate into today. I'm not aware of folks complaining about what the company puts in its application until now, with all due respect to the commission staff and understand their position. But a lot of this is really the function of the pleading is to put the parties on notice, the parties on notice as to what relief the company's seeking. If there's any terms and conditions that they want to change in their GTs and Cs, they typically do that. And then it's the discovery process among the parties that unfolds, and we see these issues develop and bubble up to the surface. Because I think, as the South Carolina Supreme Court has said, there's a presumption that the utilities' ability to recover to recover expenses is presumed to be prudent until somebody, namely ORS or another party, raises the issue that it may be imprudent or not reasonable or not justified. And that's when you kind of get into this back and forth with respect to the company. There could be some things in here where there's no dispute between ORS and the parties. If that's the case, that's great. Then I think the company's going to be left wondering, well, is there a dispute maybe with a commissioner as to what may or may not have been done? And again, I don't think that's the process that's been set up under Act 175. Again, I would just simply conclude by saying that commissioners are the adjudicators, and ORS, the other parties, serve as the prosecutor, if you will, with respect to trying to get to the bottom of issues that the company's actually is requesting recovery of.
But I think you were answering in the affirmative when I asked whether or not your client believes that the utility should be able to file what the utility sets the standard for what should be filed in the application.
Well,
So that's basically.
I think the regulation today sets forth the standard that the utility has to put forth in its application. And then I think the utility is certainly free to expand upon that at their discretion if they choose to do so. And there's a lot of that happens. You have to explain certain drivers that are really kind of pushing a rate case. For example, if there's a new generating unit for an electric utility coming online, I don't think the company's just going to simply say, we hereby request recovery of ABC generator. They're going to explain that in the pleading itself in a little more detail. And then, it'll have schedules attached to it, like they're required to file under the regulation today. So, I don't want to leave you with the impression that the utility is in total command of its application, because I don't think it is. I think the regulations today govern that, but I don't think the regulations, when we were looking at the regulations back in 2007, 2006, or 2008, what have you, we weren't looking at it through the lens that we're hearing today, which is staff is getting concerned, has indicated they want more information, apparently getting a little frustrated. Again, sorry to hear that, but again, there is a process to address that, and the company doesn't believe that the process is to modify a regulation that is contrary to Act 175. The process should be to follow the process that's in place today.
I got you. Well, yeah, and staff will have to present this to the commissioners, and as you know, in a formal proceeding. And as you know, if they think that the current regulation is sufficient, they will reject the following.
Oh, sure, absolutely understand.
So,
sure.
yeah, but staff is staff is using its professional judgment and trying to do a professional job. And they feel that this is what they need to present to the commissioners. And we look forward to seeing y'all at the public hearing.
Yeah, we totally respect that, Jocelyn. I certainly don't want that to be lost. And,
Right.
And I know that the staff is trying to do their job, and again, we respect that. There's a lot of roles that have to be played, and we just wanted to point that out
Right.
as we move forward in the process.
Perfect. Thank you, Chad. Was that it? Or you have
One
something?
last thing,
Okay.
Jocelyn, is there was a comment made earlier about an application being evidence.
Well, no, the application under APA is automatically a part of the record. I think I'm right on that. Yeah, the application's automatically part of the record.
It's part of the record, but it's not necessarily evidentiary. And what, sorry to interrupt, Chad.
That's what I was going to say.
The MFRs will be part of the application, and it's up to the party bearing the burden of proof or another party to introduce the actual evidence into the record by which the commission can make a decision. So there is a possibility that utilizing MFRs, then the information are not entered in or sponsored by the company or another party, could lead the commission to use ex parte information in rendering a decision, which would in fact be a constitutional violation. So it's a little more complicated than simply filing the information and having it part of the record. It has to be evidentiary.
Yeah,
Say that again. Say that.
So-
Can you restate? I didn't follow what you just said.
Well, basically, the application, it's part of the administrative record. There's no question about that. The company does file that. However, an application on its face is not evidence.
Right.
Anything in the application would not be evidence until it is proffered to the commission by way of a witness. So if let's just say hypothetically that you've got a minimum requirement filing it here, let me find one, the performance indices.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no witness who testifies to performance indices, the commission they are not allowed by law to give that any consideration whatsoever. That's not evidence before them. And if they did so, then I think that would be a potential appealable issue that would ultimately be reversed on appeal. At least I think it would, if the commission were to consider information outside of the evidence of record that's performed and produced in the hearing room. I think that's the point that the company is trying to make here.
Okay. Let me look in there. I thought I'd seen something in our regulations about this. If y'all give me a second to look.
And
Go ahead. Keep going.
I was just saying, there's a lot of able lawyers in the room. So if I am wrong, please correct me. Sometimes I run out there and get ahead of myself. But in any event, that's how I've been practicing law for a while, and I hope to learn that it's not wrong.
So I think what you're saying, Chad and Mr. Anselmo, is because the application and the MFRs unless the commission, and I'd have to do some more research on judicial notice, but because if no one actually moves to make those the application and the MFR as part of the record, the commissioners can never, and the staff should never be reviewing the application.
I think that's correct, Jocelyn.
They can certainly review it. It can't be used to formulate the basis of a factual finding. And I think Duke raised a very, this sort of crystallized to me when Duke raised the issue of one of the schedules requested, I think, 5 years of historical data. Because the companies are limited in their filings to the historical test year, we would never introduce the other 4 years of data into the record. So if the commission were to somehow extrapolate or utilize trends or evidence that was from that portion of that MFR that was not put into evidence, that would be outside of their ability to do so.
Okay. Well, I hear your arguments. I do think I've got to look back at the APA, everybody, and I've also got to look at the 800 series. I do think that the application can easily be made a part of the record. I mean, I know someone will have to move it in, but I need to make sure that I'm not tripping over myself, meaning that I'm recalling correctly that the commission on its own. The logic of what you all are saying for me is just not flowing. The commission, I know, can require, in my opinion, what should be included in an application, just like they do now that's why the regulation is there. They do for applications, petitions, complaints, petitions to intervene. The standard is there. So that's just where I am. But I'd have to do, just to say, I can't outright say that I agree with you. I know you're all very capable.
And we're not trying to put you on the spot there, Jocelyn. We're just trying to make the distinction that something being of record and something being evidence that can be relied upon by an adjudicator is a distinction.
Right.
That requires the parties to the proceeding to introduce the evidence needed for the adjudicator to rule.
Right, and if a party does move, I think that we're both on the same page, that if a party does ask for the application, and let's say the MFRs do become, I'm not calling them MFRs, become law, they say become an order of the commission, the tables would have to pass General Assembly approval, not the MFRs. The MFRs, those are for the commissioners to decide.
I think that might be a different issue, because now you're looking at the pleading to see if it has met the requirements for actual acceptance of filing. So, for example, if a company filed a rate case and it didn't include schedules A through C, then I think the question is, okay, on the application, on its face, it's probably deficient, which would warrant somebody making a motion to dismiss, which I feel confident somebody would probably do that you need to go back to the drawing board utility and follow the commission's regulation with respect to that. So,
yeah, if it doesn't, well, all staff does. We don't review the application substantively. Well, we do to a certain degree, but we don't go in and check numbers to see if the columns are total what you say, what the applicant indicates. We look to make sure that, for example, under 823 currently, it says that the application in a general rate establishment or adjustment case must contain certain exhibits, a balance sheet, profit and loss statement, accounting and performer adjustments, so on and so forth. So we check to ensure that those documents are included in the filing. That's what we do staff-wise. We don't go and, substantively whether or not they're sufficient, or we don't have a standard to determine whether or not those tables are sufficient. So, yeah. But I guess what I'm trying to say is this. I cannot recall the language specifically of what's included in the APA. I just know that I'm confident the application is referenced. I do agree with you that what's introduced into evidence at the hearing is a totally different scenario, has nothing to do with what automatically becomes a part of the record. I have to go back and review myself. I just thought there was some other reference in our regulations about what's contained in the record of a case, not the evidentiary record on which the commissioners base their decision, but, like I said, I'm doing this off, I didn't study for that today.
Oh, hey, no, I
know y'all did, but I did.
We'll
So I'll have
how
to go
about this,
back.
Jocelyn? We'll work through it together.
Yeah, I don't want this to seem like staff was, so frustrated that this is the reason we filed this. We have to do this review every 5 years. Y'all know this is statutory. And, I'm not asking you to put yourselves in our staff's shoes, but we have professional people here. And when commissioners who are tasked with, they're professionals and they need to know certain information so that they can make sound decisions, and their professional staff, accountants, engineers, economists, can't provide certain information, that's problematic for staff. So I regret that it came across as a pity party. That's not what staff is about. Staff wants to do a professional job, just like I'm sure you all want to. And they want to be able to provide the commissioners the professional advice, based on their experience and education. And maybe it is, you use the word frustrating. It's professionally, it's not a good feeling. Let me say that. When they cannot provide just basic information to the commissioners, based on what they've asked. Now, even aside from that, that's some of staff's concerns. The other part are our regulations sufficient now, considering, are they what they should be? And so we're also looking at it from that standpoint. Are our regulations as comprehensive as they should be in 2022? So, yeah.
Jocelyn.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to prolong the discussion, but it did occur to me, I'm putting my blue granite hat on now, thinking about when Zach was asking you for clarification on the reporting in the MFRs about complaints.
Right.
I can see a scenario where you file that information. If it becomes part of the record in the case, the first time the company knows that the commission is going to penalize the company because of the level of complaints would be when you read the order. That would be from our standpoint, that would be the nightmare scenario.
Okay.
You didn't know that the commission had, you didn't know about that. You didn't have an opportunity to say, hold on a minute, don't take that out of context, let us put a witness up to explain it. Right. That's why I think there is a concern about things that are submitted. When you start broadening, what the traditional things that were submitted in support of an application, and you start asking for additional things, if they automatically become part of the record, it does possibly prevent the company from being able to respond. And I think Chad referenced the utility services case was one where the court said that I know y'all are familiar with that, said that the company, well, anybody, but the applicant has to have an opportunity to respond to things that are going to be relied upon by the commission. So
yeah, and
that's just something for y'all to think about as you work through this.
Talked briefly about, Frank, the performance indices and being more specific about that. When you say used, it might not even, if it's a part of the application, it's not just for the commission. Let's say we do reach the point where the commissioners can include or can use the substance of the application. I got to do my legal research before I say yay or nay on that. But what about the other parties? Because I think we're focused, y'all are looking at it from the perspective, and you should, because they're the adjudicators, they make the decision. What are the commissioners going to do? But then other persons, members of the public, other parties can also use that information however they deem they want to use it. So it's not just this. I mean, once we open the door, the information is for everybody, the whole world, to use as they see fit, because it's a public record. And so we understand, and we're not trying to, we will be more transparent, should those remain in the performance indices as to why we need the information. I think Zach brought up a good point. Why do you want this information? The commission is one part, but then think about the other parties in the case. They might ask for the application to become part of the record. I don't know. You know, I don't know yet. But I was trying to view it from I just thought there was something that I'd read about the application and the record. So please continue, Frank. You had something else you wanted? Oh, okay.
That's all. I just wanted to give you that other example for y'all to consider.
Okay.
Thanks very much, and
Yes, sir.
nothing further.
Yes, sir. All right. I'll come back and see if anybody else has any additional comments, everybody too, as we continue. So Ms. Andrews, Ridge, were you finished, Chad and Mr. Anselmo for right now?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am, I'm through.
Okay. Ms. Andrews? Oh, she left? Okay. Ms. Andrews is not with us right now, everybody. Mr. Huber?
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Yes, sir.
And ORS, like other parties today, thanks to commission staff for its ongoing efforts related to the MFRs and the updates to the regulations. ORS's recommendations today are going to be mainly based on the MFRs and really directed at the most recent draft that was filed in the docket. There was some discussion at the last workshop about flexibility in the adding of the schedules. As far as ORS's perspective, I mean, generally speaking, provided the filing utility follows FERC or NARUC accounting guidelines and completing the MFR schedules, ORS would be okay allowing individual utilities flexibility in how the information is provided, how the information requested by specific MFR schedules is provided. And they provide it in a way that makes sense for the utility, given how that utility maintains its books and records. The only exception to that would be Schedules A1 and 2. ORS does recommend that utilities be required to provide the information in Schedules A1 and 2 substantially in the format prescribed by those schedules. And we do recognize the column headers of Schedule A2 may differ between electric and gas utilities. Moving on to the B schedules, I just have a couple of recommendations or comments. For Schedule B7, I think it currently reads the instructions that the utility must itemize major capital additions since the utilities for the test year and the prior year. ORS would recommend that it be major capital additions since the utility's last rate case. Of course, that's information we request in discovery if the commission prefers to keep the current format, which is the test year and the prior year.
Chris, give me that schedule again, please.
Schedule B7.
B7, thank you.
For Schedule B10, ORS would recommend additional language that if a lead lag study forms the basis of the utility's working capital calculation, that the lead lag study be provided, or in the alternative, the company provide the results of the lead lag study. With respect to the C schedules, for Schedule C3, ORS would recommend the utility provide a schedule showing the change in cost by account rather than functional group. I think currently the instructions for the schedule say functional group.
You said C10?
C3.
C3.
Yes. Currently it reads, provide a schedule showing the change in cost by functional group. We would suggest by account rather than functional group.
Thank you.
In Schedule C4, moving on, the next schedule, ORS would recommend the instruction be made more specific and to also require the utility to provide a list of uncollectibles by customer class and rate schedule, as well as the total amount of uncollectibles during the test year. And we also recommend that in addition to this test year, the information be provided for the prior 2 years as well. But of course, the discovery process is available if the commission limits it to the test year.
All right, I have by customer class, and tell me the other type.
So require the utility provide a list of uncollectibles by customer class and rate schedule,
Rate schedule, thank you.
as well as the total amount of uncollectibles booked during the test year.
Okay,
For Schedule C7, ORS recommends the reportable dollar threshold be lowered. For engineering-related expenses, we'd recommend a threshold of $750,000. And for non-engineering related expenses, we would recommend a threshold of $250,000. And by non-engineering, I mean accounting, financial, legal, or other. For Schedule C8, ORS would not object to the removal of this schedule to the extent pension costs were to be an issue in the case. ORS certainly could ask discovery. ORS, as far as Schedule C11, we'd request clarification regarding what information is being sought here. This is a schedule for deferred tax adjustment. ORS does believe an update on EDIT would be helpful. If that's the intent of the schedule, we think that could be included in the B series rather than the C series. For Schedule C13, as written, this MFR it's very complicated and will likely require utilities to detail thousands of transactions. One recommendation we have is that the MFR direct utilities provide a schedule summarizing by account transactions with affiliated companies and related companies for the test year, as opposed to having to provide, like I said, as opposed to be having to detail thousands of transactions.
so so provide the schedule by account.
Basically,
is what you're adding.
C13, yes, that we'd recommend the MFR direct the utility provide a schedule summarizing by account transactions with affiliated companies and related companies for the test year.
Okay,
Moving on to Schedule C14, ORS believes that Schedule C14 could be modified to remove the line's consumer price index, CPI percent increase, and index percent CPI by customer growth, which are listed under the heading growth indices. And this is based on past commission practice related to inflationary adjustments.
all right, Chris, I struck consumer price index, CPI percent increase, and you had one other one. Average customer?
Consumer price index, CPI percent increase, index percent CPI by customer growth.
Okay.
And those are all listed under the heading growth indices.
Yes, thank you.
Turning to the D schedules, there are some additional schedules we'd recommend be included, but of course this information can be requested in discovery. Those additional schedules were the Florida Schedule D4B for reacquired bonds. This was part of the proposed MFRs in 2021, as well as former Schedule D9 financial indicator summary, and this was included in the proposed schedules in May 2022. And for Schedule D7, This is financing plans, stock and bond issuances. We'd recommend that apply to the parent as well as the utility.
Okay.
For the E-schedules, ORS supports including the utilities' most recent cost of service study in the MFRs. We'd also recommend retaining the following schedules that were previously proposed in May 2022. These are schedules E3A and E4B regarding cost of service study allocations, schedules E4A and E4B regarding cost of service functionalization and classification, and then schedule E11 regarding development of coincident and non-coincident demands for the cost study. Of course, if that information is already in the cost of service study, I don't know if it's necessary for the utility to provide it by a separate schedule. Regarding Schedule E11, ORS understands it might be difficult to provide some of this information if it's not being provided on a calendar year basis, but ORS would thinks that this could be dealt with through request for extension of time to provide this schedule or potentially through waivers of
Chris,
this
what number
schedule.
did you went back, didn't you? You said something 11. What was the last schedule?
E11.
Yeah.
I was right. We had recommending including keeping that.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I did go back to E11.
Okay.
If it were to be kept, like I said, we understand that it might be difficult to provide some of that information if it's not being provided on a calendar basis. And we would submit that that could be dealt with through request for extension of time to file the schedule or potentially through waivers of the schedule for good cause shown.
Thank you.
Finally, with regard to the F schedule, there was a comment earlier about Schedule F1. And the comment was about, we noticed the same issue. It asked for a copy of a business contracts with officers, directors, and affiliates schedule included with the most recent annual report. And it's mentioned earlier, we're not aware of such a schedule. And I think a suggestion for correcting that could be requesting the company provide a list of such contracts, as well as identify any such contracts that were identified as most recent audited financial statements in the company's most recent audited financial statements. I know there was a suggestion earlier related to, I believe, whether that's part of an annual report or a FERC form. I don't know the answer to the question whether that information is available through that means as well. It might be.
Okay. We said we were going to look at that again, F1.
But again, those are ORS's comments. Again, they're directed, like I said, to the MFRs, and we appreciate the opportunity to appear today and provide that feedback, and am able to do my best to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Elliott?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Are you ready to
I'll be
proceed?
brief.
Okay.
We appreciate the effort that the staff has gone to, not only to put these proposals together, but really to recognize the distinctions between the larger regulated utilities, public utilities, and the smaller utilities. Typically, water and wastewater are much, much smaller than, say, the electric IOUs. I would note that some of these smaller water and wastewater companies, while at least my client would be capable of many of these additional obligations for filing, we would like to point out that, typically these costs are passed along to ratepayers. and the regulatory process grows increasingly complicated, and rate case expenses grow in proportion. An example left in the document, I'm looking at the minimum filing requirements for wastewater utility rate cases, and Schedule A-9.5 would require a cost of service study completed not more than 3 years prior to the company's filing. There is sort of a threshold of $1 million. It's my experience that most of these smaller companies do not perform cost of service studies, certainly not in the sense that the IOUs do. And that $1 million seems like a lot, but it's not. I looked in the most recent Palmetto wastewater reclamation case, one of the more recent wastewater cases, and these customers who are principally middle and low middle class produce over $4 million of revenue, at least according to the most recent filing. So this $1 million threshold would probably protect some very, very small companies, but they'd be small. And so we'd ask you to consider that threshold. I'm not sure how y'all arrived at it, but I would suggest that additional thought might be beneficial here. Second, and this has been referred to, I'm looking at A17. My friend at Blue Granite mentioned it. My understanding is that all this data is available, and the information requested is a matter of arithmetic computation, I think. But we're hard pressed to know what benefit having this information would serve, and I think there's been some discussion among the folks here today and yourself about looking into this matter a little further to see to consider what purpose this information could be put to, and I would urge you to do that. I'd like to mention a couple of additional things. Frank Ellaby mentioned 103-803. Frank is much braver than I. I'm not sure I would have made this suggestion or been brave enough to make this suggestion if Frank hadn't led the way. But I do think that this language, not contrary to the public interest, is preferable to this language in the public interest. Everybody's in favor of the public interest, but I think in the case of a waiver, I think there are some distinctions between the wording, but I think that the public interest ultimately is served or certainly not impacted. So I would urge y'all to keep the existing language. Such waiver is not contrary to the public interest. Ms. Fox brought up what I thought was a nice point. Mr. Anselmo mentioned it in 103-833. This is the provision dealing with attorney work product. I think that Ms. Fox sort of quoted really sort of the Hornbook law on this, and it would be material prepared in anticipation of litigation. We have here hearing preparation. I think that narrows it. I have in my practice before the commission investigated facts and issues prior to filing an application and have concluded that and have been dissuaded from doing so. So I think that I would ask that the staff consider employing what would be a sort of a standard phrasing there. Material is privileged when prepared in connection with litigation. And I think by all means, including the working papers would be helpful too. Last, and my impression is from the comments that the filing of testimony in rate cases, the timing of the filing of testimony in rate cases may be a fait accompli. I am late to this party, But I do think that there are benefits to allowing these applicants to file rate applications and get started with discovery and discussions with the consumer advocate and the Office of Regulatory Staff, which has, I think, in every case I've been involved with, narrowed the issues that my clients have pursued in testimony. So there are some issue preclusion, issue simplification principles that militate in favor of keeping the pre-filing to where it is, and I thought I felt compelled to mention that to you, even if the attendees in this proceeding are prepared to acquiesce and acknowledge this 3.5. So I appreciate the opportunity to set out our position, and I've enjoyed listening to the comments of these other parties. Obviously, y'all have put a lot of thought in this, and I think the document is improved. So thank you.
Scott, may I ask one last question on the pre-file? So were you saying that your client's preference is for the 845 to remain the same? 103, 845?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
We'll follow the procedure, but there are some advantages. Before we sort of jettison the concept, I think that I would urge this group to consider that the benefits to allowing the utility to file sometime after its filing. There's some benefits, obviously, to the ORS and to the Department of Consumer Affairs, and at least in theory to the customers, because they have the full benefit of not only the application but the testimony. But I do think that the filing testimony after some discovery and some discussions and negotiations with the ORS will bear fruit. It will eliminate issues, include others, I suppose, but and is in furtherance of judicial economy. So I think that there's a compelling argument in favor of filing testimony, as we have done since I've been practicing before the commission.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, so we're going to go back through the list to see if anyone has any other comments. Let's see. We'll start again with Peg.
Nothing further, thank you.
All right. Mr. Richardson.
Nothing further. Thank you.
All right. And Mr. Parker. He's not there. Okay, thank you. And Frank.
Nothing further. Thank you, Jocelyn.
You're welcome. And Frank again. Blue Grant.
Nothing further from Blue
All right. Chad.
Nothing further. Thank you, Jocelyn.
You're welcome. Is Ms. Andrews back on? Do you see Ms. Andrews? Okay. And then Chris.
Nothing further, Jocelyn. Thank
All right.
you.
You're welcome. And Scott, do you have anything else?
No, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, everybody. So, as I told you all, I'm going to do my research about how the application can be used. I need to, like I said, I need to review our regulations again, and also the Administrative Procedures Act. And, yeah. So the next thing, when we do file the notice of drafting so that we can start the formal process for not only this Article 8, but the others, staff will, of course, I will file with the Legislative Council the notice of drafting and the proposed regulation, but we are also going to attach in DMS the version of wherever we are with our proposed regulation, so that you remain abreast of what's going on here with staff. So when I file the notice of drafting, you will also see a version of, let's say if it's Article 8, where staff's minds are at that point. So you won't be in the dark. So whatever comments you want to file, won't be like the normal process where you just file the notice of drafting and then you don't know what the agency or this staff is thinking. You'll know where we are at that point. And then when we file the proposed regulation, of course, it'll be the proposed one. Because I allow for at least 30 days between the posting of the notice of drafting in the state register, more than 30 days, actually, a little bit more, to the time that, between that period of time of the publication of the notice of drafting and then the publication of the proposed regulation. It's at least a month, maybe 2 months. But anyway, you won't be in the dark about what we were thinking at that time. Okay?
Jocelyn,
Yes.
I'm sorry. There were a couple of things that we offered to send y'all some language.
Yes.
That sort of put some words on the proposals that we had made.
Right.
We'll plan on doing that in the next few days. Would that be helpful?
The next week will be fine.
Okay.
They don't, the second, of course, you know this, I have to file any document with the Legislative Council by the second Friday. So I'm not going to get this done by August 12th. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank you,
great
Jocelyn.
end of the week. Thank
Have a
you.
good week.
You too.